Argentina has a new president, the libertarian Javier Milei. For the first time, we can find a clearly libertarian president, a guy who even declares himself an enemy of the state and of everything that has to do with government intervention. This has provoked all kinds of reactions, but above all, there have been two that have stood out. Those who consider him a disciple of Donald Trump, and those who consider him an extreme right-wing politician. We are talking about a guy whose career has been meteoric, from being practically unknown to just a few years later becoming the president, and not just any president, but one who comes to power with a totally groundbreaking promise to completely change the entire economic, political, and social system of Argentina. In other words, Milei arrives as a kind of bulldozer with a mission as clear as it is ambitious: to demolish once and for all the fundamental bases of Peronism. Best of all, Milei was not only an unknown, but also achieved this feat without belonging to any of Argentina's historical political formations. He did it by setting up his own party. Freedom advances. As you have seen, there are many media outlets, analysts, and politicians who accuse him of being part of the extreme right. But is it really possible to say something like that? Is Milei part of the extreme right? And that is not all. As we've already told you, he is also compared to Bolsonaro, Viktor Orban, and Donald Trump himself.
Very clearly, he is a mini Trump. Trump is an icon of this new form of extreme populism, and Milei wants to emulate him.
So the question is, to what extent does Javier Milei resemble Donald Trump, Jair Bolsonaro, or even Viktor Orban? Does the Argentinian lion really have so much in common with the former president of the United States, the former president of Brazil, and the prime minister of Hungary? Of course, based on messages like this one, it would appear he has a lot in common.
Donald Trump is one of the few who has understood the battle against socialism. Thank you so much, President Trump. Your presidency was an example for all of us who defend the ideas of freedom, and I hope to meet you soon. Have no doubt that we are going to make Argentina great again. Our geopolitical alignment is the United States and Israel. That is our international policy. We are not going to align ourselves with communists.
Milei himself has often expressed his sympathy for all these political players, and of course, they have not hidden theirs for the movement led by Milei either. Take a look.
A very special congratulations to Javier Milei on a great race for president of Argentina. The whole world was watching, and I am very proud of you. You will turn your country around and truly make Argentina great again.
E tenho certeza que Deus vai te iluminar, vai te proteger, você fará bom governo para o bem dos nossos países.
Nevertheless, VisualPolitik viewers, let's not be in such a hurry. It is true that we can see a clear coincidence in style. Both Milei and Trump, Bolsonaro, and even Orban tend to have a very harsh tone. They are aggressive, and all of them position themselves as an alternative to the system. In a way, they share a certain populist tinge. All of them are characterized by clearly choosing an opponent, an enemy, highlighting some star and almost miraculous measure that they repeat ad nauseum, and for confronting the media. From a political messaging point of view, Trump's immigrants are the same as Milei's classes. But guess what? That's it for the similarities. The truth is that on the big issues, in positioning and political agenda, Milei is as similar to Trump, Orban, and Bolsonaro as an egg is to a chestnut. To a certain extent, Trump, Bolsonaro, and Orban do have many similarities. However, Argentina's new president, let's just say he belongs to a completely different club. Wait a minute, you don't believe me? Do you think we're exaggerating? Well, if you think so, let's start by making a comparison between Javier Milei and Donald Trump. Although in most cases, this same comparison could be applied to other leaders we mentioned. Pay close attention, because these are the 7 major political differences between these two leaders who, at their core, could not be more different. But before, do you know what a DDoS attack is? It consists in sending a high volume of data to an IP address to overload the network, which makes, if you are attacked, your internet unstable. A simple click on an email link or an Instagram message, for example, can make your IP exposed. Once the attacker has it, they can launch a DDoS attack and disrupt your service. So what can we do? Well, be very careful. Don't click on strange links. And use NordVPN's threat protection tool to be safe. With NordVPN, you will surf safely, since your IP address will be hidden. In case of an attempted DDoS attack on the VPN address, the VPN servers will handle the attack, and you will have no disruptions. In addition, using NordVPN, you will be able to browse without borders, unlocking a whole world of content, and it is compatible with all types of devices, and you can include up to 6 on the same account. So don't wait any longer. Check out NordVPN and get 4 months extra on a 2-year plan by going to nordvpn.com/VPEN. And if you change your mind after trying it out, don't worry, NordVPN has a 30-day money-back guarantee. And now, let's get back to the video.
The commercial wall.
Okay, I think we all know that this matter is, along with immigration, one of the great hallmarks of the 45th President of the United States of America, and also the first major difference we can find with Milei. Trump is a die-hard protectionist, and the same could be said to a certain extent about Bolsonaro and Orban. These 3 politicians are constantly talking about growing local industry, buying locally made products, and the like. In fact, free trade is one of the issues that first attracted Trump to politics. As early as the 1980s, he was appearing on television programs denouncing Japan for stealing from the United States with its exports. That is why, when he announced his candidacy for the Republican primaries in 2015, he put trade precisely at the center of his campaign.
China is killing us. The money they took out of the United States is the greatest theft in the history of our country.
And when he came to government, well, let's just say he didn't exactly stand still. Trump launched a trade war against the European Union. He pulled the United States out of the TPP, the largest free trade agreement in history. He launched a major trade war against China, imposing heaps of tariffs, and he threatened left and right with commercial retaliation. In the end, the result of all these measures was a failure. The trade deficit continued to grow, and according to several studies, the trade war cost American families tens of billions of dollars and destroyed more than 200,000 jobs. But that's another story. And okay, some of you may be thinking, Josh, he did that because of this and that. But it's not really that he was against free trade, right? Well, now Trump is running again in the Republican primaries. And guess what one of his star measures is? Well,
Trump promises massive new tariffs if elected, risking global economic war.
Okay, I'm sure some of you are thinking, here we go, the press is manipulating his words again. Well, look at what he says himself.
I think that when companies come in and dump their products in the United States, they should automatically pay, say, a 10% tax.
Exactly. We're talking about Trump advocating a general tariff of around 10% on any product entering the United States. To give you an idea, that would more than triple the average tariff, which is currently below 3%. So the question is, what does Milei say on this subject? Well, basically, the opposite. Milei wants to open Argentina's borders to international trade. In fact, in his government program, he has committed to eliminate tariffs and any other restriction to international trade, including quotas, permits, and authorizations. He even said things like this about Mercosur.
Yo creo que hay que eliminar el Mercosur porque es una unión aduanera defectuosa que perjudica a los argentinos de bien. O sea, en el fondo es un comercio administrado por estados para favorecer empresarios prebendarios.
So you see, first major difference. Let's move on.
Close the central bank.
VisualPolitik community. If we said earlier that protectionism was a hallmark of Trumpism, I think no one will have the slightest doubt that the elimination of the central bank so that politicians cannot get their hands on it is one of Milei's great political traits. In fact, the new Argentine president made dollarization and the closing of the central bank his flagship policy. It was something he vehemently argued for. Check it out.
El Banco Central está haciendo de las suyas de nuevo. Creo que es hora de cerrarlo.
¡Destrucción! 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 ¡Basta inflación!
Milei blames the central bank for many of the great ills of the Argentine economy, starting with inflation. Well, perhaps it's fair to say he blames the ability of politicians to meddle with the central bank and use it to finance their every whim and monetize public debt. According to Milei, this has destroyed the peso and Argentina's finances. Well, do you know what? Trump is basically advocating the opposite. Yes, you heard me correctly. One of Trump's great and constant criticisms during his time in the White House was precisely the independence of the Federal Reserve. Trump constantly tried to pressure them to print more money, lower rates, and even monetize the federal debt.
The Federal Reserve should get our interest rates down to 0 or less, and we should then start to refinance our debt. We know I did a lot of lobbying. It was external pressure because nobody knows if you can really do that or not, but I did it because I thought their interest rates were too high, and they finally lowered their interest rates.
And keep in mind, rates peaked at 2.5% while the US economy was growing at a good pace, and yet Trump was complaining and pressuring the Fed again and again. Do you now understand how the inflation crisis began to brew? The fact is that the former president did it during his time in the White House and is doing it again now as a candidate in the Republican primaries.
Trump bemoans high interest rates and indicates he may push Fed to lower.
Central bank independence? Ha! Print more money. That was one of Trump's big workhorses, because he knew that, in the short term, it would stimulate the economy, which would improve his popularity level. And remember, it's not just us saying it. He said it himself.
People can't buy homes. They can't do anything. I mean, they can't borrow money.
Once again, I remind you that we are talking about rates around 2%. And whether you think it is better or worse, Milei's opinion on this is exactly the opposite. No printing more money. No artificially inflating the national economy, and no monetizing public debt. Another pretty significant difference, don't you think? Of course, we are not done. In fact, Trump's insistence that the Fed increase the money supply has a lot to do with the following 2 points. Pay attention.
Putting out the fire with gasoline.
Okay, both Trump and Milei, and also Bolsonaro and Orban, talk about lowering taxes. That, in theory, may be a point in common. Nevertheless, it rests on one fundamental difference. Milei wants to lower taxes, offsetting falling government revenues with spending cuts. In Trump's case, that's not so. Trump wanted the Fed to lower rates, print more money, and buy more government debt, precisely to finance his growing deficit. In fact, the annual deficit growth during his leadership ranks as the largest increase relative to the size of the economy of any president in US history. He is second only to George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, with one difference. Trump did not have to face wars within the country. Let's just say that the former American president made public spending grow year after year, while, on top of that, he lowered taxes. The budget gap was enormous. To give you an idea, when he came to the White House, the deficit was 2.5%, and in 2019, the public deficit had reached 4.6%, despite the fact that the country was growing and the pandemic had not yet arrived. This is another important difference, because for Milei, zero deficit and reducing public spending is a priority. And then, to top it all off, the pandemic arrived.
The mountain.
By mountain, we are not talking rocks and snow or anything like that, but rather the huge mountain of debt that Donald Trump continued to accumulate. During only 4 years of government, the public debt grew by almost $7.8 trillion. That's more than $20,000 per inhabitant. Crazy. Not only that, when the pandemic hit, Trump clearly showed how he advocated dealing with the crisis by spending tons and tons of public money. He even went so far as to send checks to families to spend. In fact, the federal government's response to the COVID crisis alone, following Trump's plan, exceeded 8% of GDP. As a comparison, between 1933 and 1939, federal spending grew under Roosevelt's New Deal by about 5% of GDP, and the response to the Great Recession of 2008 equaled 3%. The result of Trump's plan? Skyrocketing public debt, or rather, even more skyrocketing. Let me say again, regardless of whether you like these measures or not, assessing them is not the point of this video. The point is that, once again, it goes in the opposite direction to what Milei advocates.
No se negocia el equilibrio fiscal. El equilibrio fiscal no está bajo discusión. Ministro que me gasta más, lo echo. no sé si soy claro, ministro que gasta más, lo hecho, el 2024 va a terminar con equilibrio fiscal.
What's more, how Trump had to finance that huge budget gap. Then he pressured the Federal Reserve to lower rates and buy public debt. In this respect, Trump's moves were more similar to Sergio Massa's than Javier Milei's. So neither on central banking, nor on how to lower taxes, nor on the level of public spending, nor on public debt, nor on international trade, do Milei and Trump have shared positions. Rather, as you can see, they are at opposite ends of the spectrum. Of course, it's not all about the economy.
Abortion.
Milei is very clear and does not mince his words. He says that abortion is murder and is furiously against it. He has even promised a referendum to reverse the legislation that was approved in Argentina in 2020.
I am against abortion, openly, because it goes against the right to life.
Argentina's new president has gone so far as to say that people who are in favor of abortion are, and I quote, brainwashed by a murderous policy. So what about Donald Trump? Well, let's just say he doesn't have such a clear position, nor does it seem to be something that is a priority for him. In 1999, for example, he publicly defended women's rights to decide.
I'm very pro-choice. I hate the concept of abortion. I hate it. I hate everything it stands for. I cringe when I listen to people debating the subject. But I just believe in choice.
That is a position very similar to the one held, for instance, by Joe Biden. It is true that he then boasts that under his administration, conservative judges were chosen for the Supreme Court, and this brought down the benchmark Roe v. Wade ruling of 1973, which recognized a woman's right to have an abortion, and that this issue has now been shifted to state policy. But he has done that because he knows that he cannot afford to lose the support of many conservative sectors. But that, yes, at the same time, Trump refuses to support a national restriction, and in fact now in his campaign we can find messages like this one.
Trump calls DeSantis' abortion ban a terrible mistake, drawing ire from some key Republicans.
To which DeSantis did not hesitate to respond.
I don't know how you can even make the claim that you are pro-life if you're criticizing states for enacting protections for babies that have heartbeats.
So you see, it's another matter where Milei and Trump play in different leagues. But let's go on.
Don't let them in.
Okay, if we were saying earlier that protectionism was one of the hallmarks of Trumpism, I think we will all agree that immigration is the other big feature. Trump does not want immigrants of any kind. He advocates ending illegal immigration, but also restricting and limiting legal immigration. In fact, the way he speaks about people arriving from abroad is not exactly very welcoming. If you take a close look at his 2024 candidacy, it is about just that, further restricting both illegal and legal immigration. Not surprisingly, he talks about deporting millions of people. Javier Milei's position, on the other hand, once again, is very different. He is conceptually and ideologically in favor of much more open immigration systems. In his opinion, the only problem with immigration is the cost to social services.
There are documents that prove that in those countries that are more open, there is more innovation, more growth, so immigration is a good thing. When our grandparents or our parents came, they came to earn their bread by the sweat of their brow, and there was no welfare state. The problem arises with immigration when there is a welfare state.
That is why he has said that if there were, for example, a system of generalized vouchers or a private system, then he would support an open immigration regime practically. Again, it is a position that is at odds with Trump. But, VisualPolitik community, we still have one last point.
Ukraine and various tyrants.
At times, Milei has said that he supports Trump's foreign vision. Even so, when we get into the details, things change quite a bit.
Those of us who unhesitatingly defend a model of open and free society must join forces in favor of an effective strategy to confront the enemies of freedom, who, as in the past, are once again trying to drag humanity back to dark times of chaos and misery.
This has Milei supporting Ukraine and Israel, while Trump is betting on stopping aid to Kyiv.
Congratulations to Javier Milei on his convincing victory in Argentina's presidential elections. I appreciate his clear stance in support of Ukraine. I look forward to working together to strengthen our cooperation and restore international order based on international law.
And let's not forget encounters like this one. Surely you all remember it, don't you?
Trump says North Korea's Kim very honorable.
And what does Milei say? Well, basically that he wants absolutely nothing to do with authoritarianism or communism. That at the level of private commerce, it is all very well, but at the level of government, zilch.
Yo no promovería la relación con comunistas, ni con Cuba, ni con Venezuela, ni con Corea del Norte, ni con Nicaragua, ni con China.
So there you have it. These are 7 of the big differences between Trump and Milei, and also between Milei and Bolsonaro and Orban. And as you can see, we are not exactly talking about small or inconsequential matters, but about absolutely key issues, fundamental pillars when it comes to shaping the type of state argued for by one or the other. Okay, it's true, Milei and Trump do have some overlap on issues like climate change, gun control, and government regulations, yet, as you have seen, they advocate completely different models of society. And then, regardless of whether you like this character and the policies he stands for, the argument that he is part of the extreme right that is reported by many journalists, well, what do you want me to say? Not by a long shot. Milei has promised to cut public spending, open borders, lower taxes, and close the central bank. He defends and promotes freedom and has no problem with gender, background, or sexuality. So really, what does he have that would categorize him as extreme right? Whatever the case, we could say that he is ultra-liberal, libertarian, or ultra-capitalist. But let's be honest, when we talk about extreme right, we think of something very different. Be that as it may, the question is, will he be able to do it? Leave us your answers in the comments.